Hey everybody, in this video, another all Shimano solution to getting a wide-ranging 1x drivetrain on your existing GRX 11-speed setup. Now in a previous video, we experimented a little bit with Frank's bike, and we were actually able to install a brand new GRX 822 long cage derailleur, which is a 12-speed derailleur, on his existing 11-speed GRX 1x setup, and that allowed us to shift through an 11 to 51 tooth cassette in the rear. Now that was also an all Shimano setup. There were no tan pans or goat links, but you still had to purchase a brand new derailleur to make that work. Now that GRX 822 derailleur will set you back about $130. However, in this video, we're going to try an even cheaper all Shimano solution that will hopefully give us the same result using the existing GRX 812 derailleur. So the plan is to actually take an existing GRX 812 derailleur like the one I have here, and we're going to replace the derailleur cage with a cage from an XT mountain bike derailleur. Now these are parts from the M8000 series XT derailleur. Now you actually have to buy the inner and the outer plates separately, but in total it comes out to roughly $20 or $25 for both of them. And I'll put links down in the description for these exact parts that I'm using here. So this process isn't too tricky, but you do have to deal with some springs, and there is some potential to pinch yourself or otherwise injure yourself. So definitely be aware of that before you start this mod. So the first thing you want to do is to turn the derailleur clutch off, and then we actually have to unwind this extra spring tension. And the way we want to do that is to remove this little cage stop here. And to remove it, you first want to relieve some of the pressure by holding the cage with a slight gap like so. And then you just take a Phillips screwdriver and you unscrew that stop. It's basically just this little threaded peg that comes out that prevents the derailleur cage from winding up too far. Now at this point, you want to carefully let the derailleur cage unwind by one turn. But in order to do that, you've got to get the body of the derailleur out of the way, which will allow the derailleur cage to rotate through. So next you want to take a 2mm Allen and remove the 3 bolts that hold the cap on the derailleur. Now be careful not to lose this little rubber gasket. We are going to want to put that back in place when we put this cap back on. Okay, keep in mind that this is directional, so you want to put it back in the same orientation that you removed it. Now you can take your 4mm Allen and stick it through the clutch and unscrew the derailleur cage. So you just have to back it out far enough so that the derailleur cage on the opposite side can come off. Now be real careful not to lose these components on the inside. There is a spring, there's another sort of plastic gasket with a notch that sits into this little cutout in the derailleur body. If it does fall out, the order you want to put things back is the spring. Now the spring is directional. There's a hooked edge as well as just a flat edge. The flat edge of the spring should match up with this little notch in the derailleur body right here. There's also a flat washer that should sit right in the middle there. And then the rubber gasket should slide down on top with the flat side facing out like so. But for reference, here's the original 812 cage, and here are the new plates for the XT cage. You can see that they're actually really similar in design, and so that's why this mod works. The XT cage is basically just a longer version of the GRX 812 cage. Now just keep in mind that for the XT cage, there is an SG version as well as a longer cage SGS version. What you want is the SGS version for both the inner and the outer plates. So the pulley wheels just require a 3mm Allen on opposing sides. And just be careful not to lose the hardware because you will be reusing those on the XT cage as well. And then also keep track of the jockey wheels themselves. There's an upper jockey wheel which has deeper teeth, and then the lower jockey wheel has shallower teeth. Now these even have a direction of rotation indicated on the wheel itself, so keep that in mind as you're transferring these over. And then we'll just cinch these down. Now the XT plate did come with that, I don't know what this is called, the cage stop. We do want to remove this so that when we install the cage on the derailleur, we can wind it up to the proper spring tension. Now when you reinstall the cage, you'll notice that there is a hooked end to the spring. That spring has to go into one of these holes on the derailleur cage. So we're going to line up the hooked part of the spring into this hole here. Try and keep the derailleur body pointing up so that all these components don't fall out. So with the spring lined up in that second hole, we're just now going to tighten the derailleur cage to the body from the other side. There's actually quite a bit of friction, but there's definitely a hard stop when you feel that you're bottomed out. And the torque spec on this is only 2 Newton meters, so no need to go crazy with the torque here. If you're paranoid like me, you can go ahead and just use a torque wrench. This is not something that I'd want to fall off mid-ride, so may as well. Okay. And then before we close it up, you want to make sure that the clutch mechanism is sort of intact, how it's supposed to be. Make sure this little piece didn't actually fall off of the clamp like so. You want it to be sort of on the actual clamp. Remember that there's this sort of rubber gasket. So you want to make sure that that's sat right in that groove. So then you just want to go ahead and put the cap back on and reinstall the 3 2mm Allen screws. There's no torque spec on these, but these are small little screws, so don't go crazy with the torque here. Pre-wind the derailleur cage, and again you'll have to move the derailleur body out of the way by compressing the spring, which will allow the cage to slide through. And then while you're applying pressure, you want to go ahead and screw that cage stop back in place. Now this part can be pretty tricky if you're doing it by yourself. It would be really helpful to have somebody kind of hold the cage in place as you did this, but with enough patience you might be able to just get a thread started, and you can do this by yourself. So it's a Phillips head screwdriver, which is kind of strange, so you're just going to tighten that down like so. And there you have it. So pretty clean, an all Shimano mod. Again, this is GRX 812 body with a Shimano XT M8000 cage. Now before we can actually test out this derailleur on the wide-ranging cassette, we do have to modify other parts of the bike. We are essentially converting this from a 2x to a 1x system. I'm just going to skip through that really quickly here, but I will have another video explaining the entire 2x to 1x conversion process if that's something you're interested in. Basically, we just need to take off the chain, take off the cranks, swap the 2 chain rings to a single chain ring, remove the front derailleur, and swap the rear derailleur to the modified one. And then this is a Shimano Dior 11-speed, 11 to 51 tooth cassette, which really looks kind of ridiculous on this set of 650B wheels, but it is what it is. This is 27.5 by 2.1. Thankfully, it fits just fine inside the rear triangle of the diverge. And you know what, just for good measure, I just want to make sure the hanger is straight before I try and jump to any conclusions about whether or not this works. Okay, so slightly flared out, so we got that nice and straight, just so that we're starting with a clean slate. Now, the last piece of the puzzle here is whether or not the chain is going to be long enough. Now, obviously, the cassette grew quite a bit, but at the same time, the big ring in the front came down quite a bit, from a 48 down to a 1x40 tooth chain ring. Yes, I know I should be replacing these links, but just trying to get a feel for whether or not this is going to work. Okay, so didn't touch the chain length at all. Let me move the camera around. Actually looks pretty good. Like, this is probably where I'd have it in the small ring. So yes, the B limit screw certainly needs to go in to accommodate for this giant dinner plate. So I think I got it pretty much as best as I can. B limit screw is adjusted, high-low limit screws, hanger is as straight as I can get it. Now, actually, I did realize when I was putting this chain back on that this is a SRAM chain with the Dior cassette. So I realize it's not an ideal setup. I should really have a Shimano chain on here, but for purposes of demonstration, here goes nothing. I think it works. All right, well, there you have it. It does appear that the Shimano XT cage on the GRX 812 derailleur will actually allow you to shift through an enormous cassette. Now, obviously, this was a little bit more involved than just swapping over a derailleur. We did have to swap the cage, and that takes a little bit of effort. But the total cost out the door for the inner and the outer plates was like 25 bucks. So it does seem like this is another feasible setup if you want an all Shimano drivetrain that's 1x, that's super wide range. Now, one thing that I will mention is that in the biggest and maybe the second biggest cog on the cassette, the drivetrain definitely does make a little bit of noise. You have to remember that on a 1x setup, the chain angle can get pretty extreme when you're at the smallest and biggest cogs on the cassette. But for now, I'm gonna call this a success. I'll ride it around for a little bit. If I notice anything weird or if something starts to not work like it should, I'll update you guys here. Thanks again for watching. Thanks for subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'll see you next time.